Have you ever heard practice makes perfect? Well, that's what we're doing. We're practicing, we're practicing, we're practicing. So we're in the midst of B2, which is co-responsibility for mission. And we're practicing again and again this conversation in the Spirit. It's not as easy as it sounds, and it really takes deep listening, because it's in the depth of the listening that we really allow the Spirit to come forward. So what does B2 look like? Well, the first part of it is, how do we talk about mission in a synodal church, or how does synodality point us to mission? And there we see that just engaging in the conversation already brings people together. That bringing people together brings people disposed to each other and disposed to turn outwards. And that's the first sign and the first movement towards mission. In our second section, we dealt with the ministerial church, or a church of ministers. So what that's saying is that because of our baptism, we are all prophet, priest, and king, and every one of us is called to be a minister in this church. And how do we conceive of the church as an all ministerial church? And that points us in a very different direction as church. It's an Ephesians 4 model of church, and you look it up. Ephesians 4:1, that first part of it. You see Paul saying, I, a prisoner of the Lord, implore you to live your life worthy of your vocation. And then he talks about all the gifts and the call to unity. The third part of the synod of this time, we're looking at the baptism of all believers, and what does that mean for the role of women in our church. Now, you know, the Caribbean is different from other parts of the world. Other parts of the world, they're talking about how do we get women involved in the church. In the Caribbean, we're talking about how could we get some men to be, involved in the church at the governance level, and apart from priests, to be involved. And so it's a very different experience in other parts of the world. The before is, how can we think of the relationship between the presbyter and those with the baptism who are called to be ministers? Because if we're thinking of an all ministerial church, what's the relationship between the priests and all the ministers in the church? And the ordination of the priest and the priesthood of all the believers is really vital, that we manage that relationship really well. And B5 is, how do we conceive of the Episcopacy in this all ministerial church, and how does Episcopacy be a service for mission and synodality? And well, the conversations were warm, rich, complex, and they were very, very wonderful. Today, what we did, yesterday afternoon and today, what we did was listen to all the reports of the 5 sections. Then we had free interventions by many different people, which we listened to again. This evening, when we gather, we will be collecting that fruit from our listening of a day and a half. It's a lot of listening, it's a lot of fruit. We're going to be taking that fruit, synthesizing it back into the document that we had prepared for our first report, and then that comes together, goes back into the secretariat, and all the reports go through now the next round, which is when the theologians and those responsible gather those reports, listen to them, and glean from them what is the Spirit saying to the church. So we are in this listening process. It's training us to really listen with our ears and with the ear of our heart. I would invite you to practice this listening, because we're going to be doing it a lot in our church. It's the only way that we're going to move beyond the fractured societies that we are living in. My highlight today, oh yes, well, I met the Holy Father and we had a wonderful little exchange. And that was so precious and so wonderful. You continue praying for us as we continue doing the work that has been set out to us by the Church, by the Holy Father, by the Holy Spirit. God bless.